And yes, I know. I'm going to change that, by the way. I'm going to change it to auto record. Yeah, so this might be Dokai actually started to talk about this during one of his Dharma talks. And he then sort of took a left turn. I wasn't able to be there for the entire winter practice period, but like it seemed like every Dharma talk was about the first realization. I don't know if we ever made it past the first realization or not. I don't know if maybe somebody who was there will know. But again, I'm sort of going to be stuck on the first realization as well. So this is, if you don't remember, this is the Sutra on the 8 realizations of the great beings, Mahasattvas. This is a translation from Thich Nhat Hanh. This is a Mahayana text, even though it says Sutra. You can always tell because it says Mahasattvas and other things. And so, yeah, let me go. The first realization is the awareness the world is impermanent. All political regimes are subject to fail. All things composed of the 4 elements are empty and contain the seeds of suffering. Human beings are composed of the 5 skandhas, the aggregates, and are without a separate self. They're always in the process of change, constantly born and constantly dying. They are empty of self, without sovereignty. The mind is the source of all confusion, and the body is the forest of all impure actions. If we meditate on these facts, we can gradually be released from samsara, the round of birth and death. And so there's a lot of nice juxtapositions there, and there are certainly things that we can sort of reinterpret now, so many years, centuries later, in a Zen way, like the round of birth and death, but also the constantly born and dying. There are interesting echoes. But I'm actually going to concentrate just on 3 sentences, and it's that human beings are composed of 5 skandhas, aggregates, and are without a separate self. They're always in the process of change, constantly born and constantly dying. They're empty of self, without sovereignty. And I'm really going to, I hope, drive home that point about without sovereignty. And this is sort of a classical Buddhist formalization. Human beings are divided basically into 5 buckets. It's basically, you take the human experience and you go, what's this? Oh, it's form. What's this? Oh, it's feeling. They're not things per se. They get reified. So we have form, feeling, perception, mental formations, or just formations and consciousness. These are the same. We see them in the Heart Sutra. And certainly by the 7th century, they're kind of reified, which is perhaps why we need to be reminded that they're empty. In the classical Eastern understanding, we can slice this all a different way. This is heart, mind, and body. In the classical Western understanding, this is mind, body. This is the Cartesian duality. But in the modern Western understanding, this is just the interplay of environment and genes and gene expression and neurotransmitters and your gut bacteria and what you had for breakfast, which in some ways turns closer to the classical Eastern understanding. But the most important point here is that there's no separate big S self. In Latin, what we might say is there's no homunculus, no little Jushin, no little Aaron, no little cat behind the eyes driving. You see it in the cartoons, right? It's like, there's warning, and there's always a sign that says warning, and the little person behind a desk and pushing buttons madly and talking on a microphone to the stomach or the heart or the lungs or whatever. And it's not like that. As I'm fond of saying, maybe a little more crudely, we're not ghosts walking around in meat suits. And the problem I think that the Buddha recognizes and is trying to solve is that it feels that way. It seems like that. I think in the Zen tradition, we've gotten a little, I want to say glib about no self. We all talk about how we're interdependent, and it often feels very ecological. It's all very kumbaya. And I think this is true. And I think this is a great innovation. but I don't think this is what the Buddha was talking about in the Pali Canon, at least. I don't believe that a culture was a budding civilization. We'd already lost one. We'd already lost the Indus Valley civilization before, and then there's a new one rising. They understood the raining season. They understood how crops work. They understood cause and effect. If you didn't plant seeds, you weren't going to get rice. And often the Buddha used agricultural metaphors to explain what he was getting at. But he was trying to get people to recognize something phenomenological, which is a word I'm not going to try and say more than once, about first-person experience, which is literally what phenomenology is about. Here's the account of his post-awakening in the Ayachana Sutta, which everyone has heard. This is where, Brahma comes down and says, go teach. Let's see. I've heard that on one occasion when the Blessed One was newly self-awakened, he was staying near Ulavela on the bank of the Naranjara River at the foot of the goat herd's banyan tree. Then when he was alone and in seclusion, this line of reasoning arose in his awareness. This dharma that I have attained is deep, hard to see, hard to realize, peaceful, refined, beyond the scope of conjecture, subtle, to be experienced by the observant. And then he goes on to say, nobody's going to get it. There's no way I'm going to be able to teach anybody this. And this is when Brahma Sahapati comes down and says, no, there's some people who can get it. And luckily he goes on to teach the Dharma. So this is subtle and it's hard to see, and it's not obvious what it's talking about, because again, we do have the feeling that we are little people behind the eyes in control of everything. And so again, the problem, the challenge is that not only does it feel like that's the case, but there are things about self as a small else that are not the thing to be negated. They are true. They are true. So I love this one because there's not a whole lot of sutras about nuns. So this is a nun about, this is a nun. No, it's a sutra about a nun, Vajira, aptly called the Vajira Sutra. She was in Savatthi in the morning. She'd gone and done her alms, and then she sat down. I love this. She sat down at the foot of a tree for the day's abiding. So she was done with alms and she was going to get ready to meditate. And then, as will happen, Mara, the evil one, desiring to arouse fear, trepidation, and terror in the nun, Vajira, desired to make her fall away from concentration, approached her and addressed her in verse. By whom has this being been created? Where is the maker of the being? Where has the being arisen? Where does the being cease? And then it occurred to the nun Vajira, now, who is this that recited that verse? A human being or a non-human being? And then it occurred to her, this is Mara, the evil one, who has recited the verse, desiring to arouse fear, trepidation, and terror in me, desiring to make me fall away from concentration. Then the nun Vajira, having understood this is Mara, the evil one, replies to him in verses, like you do. Why now do you assume a being? Mara, have you grasped a view? This is a heap of sheer constructions. Here no being is found. Just as with an assemblage of parts, the word chariot is used, so when the aggregates are present, there's the convention, a being. So again, it's difficult. This is not sort of easy to grasp. Sometimes that ghost feels very, very solid and very real. I imagine all of you have the experience, I at least have the experience, of being accused of things I haven't done. There's a mistake, of some kind, and you can almost feel a solidification of a something. Like, I didn't do that. I like, could I have done that? No, I didn't do that. I didn't do it. No, there's no way I could have done that. Or when you're embarrassed, you have this feeling of embarrassment, and this sort of this something clenches, and you can feel it. And it's sort of, there's the ghost again. And there are times, and this goes sort of back to my my cross training, I like to say, in different traditions. There are times actually when that feeling is weak, and we should actually sort of look out for those. And so one that I was taught is when you're startled. So you'll find a lot of times, like a door slams, a book drops or something, you'll go, and exactly the opposite feeling will happen. You will completely, that entire sense of the self, the ghost, will drop away. Another really good one, and I don't suggest one goes out and snorts pepper to experience it, is about when you sneeze. So that was when we learned in the Tibetan tradition, isn't it, when you sneeze to look for the ghost. And I think this is really, really funny. I think it's funny because in the West and the Christian traditions, we say, God bless you, because you believe when you sneeze, your spirit goes out of your body. So the idea that in Tibet, we use the sneeze to see that there's not a ghost, that's just too funny for me. So they've been sitting on no self for centuries, and they didn't realize it. And there are other ways to get at no self. The Nun Vajra mentions the chariot. And so this is a very famous, let's call it an exercise that was developed many centuries later by the Buddhist philosopher Chandrakirti. It's called the sevenfold reasoning. I just want to go over it a little bit. I'll go over a couple of them. So I'll go over the 7. So this is an exercise you perform that helps you get at, first of all, the no self of things, and then you can apply it to the no self of self. So no capital S, no ghost. So there are 7 of them. There is no chariot, which is other than its parts. So you can think of it, let's see, so there I have a pen. There is no pen other than its parts. So if you start to, the lid, and you have the felt here, and there's an ink cartridge and the cap and the barrel. So there's no pen apart from the parts. There's no pen that is the same as its parts. So I'm going to say pen from that, because I have a pen in my hand instead of a chariot. I should have gotten like a Hot Wheels or something. So that there's no pen. So there's no pen which is the same as its parts. So you start looking at this and you go, well, yeah, this is a cap, and you can do it to the parts too, the cap, and then there's, the plastic, and it gets kind of harder when you go down to individual pieces. So there's no pen which possesses its parts. So there's no pen over here which has these parts. There's no pen that depends on the parts. So there's no pen like underneath it or on top that has its parts underneath it. There's no pen upon which the parts depend. So that's the other way. There's no pen which is the collection of the parts. So like if I could take the pen apart, I should have grabbed the pen I could take apart. Like that's not a pen anymore. And there's no pen there's no pen shape here that I'm putting parts into. So if you do this, and part of the problem I'm having describing this, and because I used to do this often, if you do this long, the world gets really melty, because you get really good at it, and you just look at things, and things just start dropping away, and it just all feels very melty is the only word I can use to describe it. The world starts to feel melty. And then, of course, the practice is once you have, because it's easy to think of pens as such. and chariots as such, and microphones as such, then you apply it to yourself, and then you discover that there's no ghost. But you need to get that firm sense of what it is you're negating, or you'll get distracted, because there is. I am sitting here, I am talking, you sitting there, and you're listening, more or less. I did cut myself yesterday on a piece of cardboard, no less. So it's like, yeah, why is that cardboard sharp? But that's a different question. So if you keep doing that, yeah, you could. So I think you'll have some experiences, as they say in the Tibetan tradition. So that's just the first sentence. And then the next sentence, I'm going to skip to the third sentence. So they're empty of self without sovereignty. And so I really want to hone in a little bit on this without sovereignty bit. In the Anatta Lakkhana Sutra, the Buddha actually uses this lack of sovereignty to demonstrate that there's no ghost. And Dokai actually started this in one of his Dharma talks during the winter practice period, but I think he only read the first one. I know this is also the Dharma talk where he told me to sit down. I was tenzo, and I went to get up, and he said, "Sit down. I only got 2 more minutes." So and then he added, "Lunch might be late," but lunch wasn't late, so that's okay. And very often I've seen translations of this sutra where, in the Pali Canon, there's a lot of repetition. And so they ... things a lot. So it's just like, yeah, what we just said, but with this substituted in. And yeah, what we just said, but with this substituted in. So I'm going to read the whole thing. So this is just part of it. Form, O monks, is not self. If form were self, then form would not lead to affliction, and it should obtain regarding form. May my form be thus, may my form not be thus. And indeed, O monks, since form is not self, therefore form leads to affliction, and it does not obtain regarding form. May my form be thus, may my form not be thus. Feeling, O monks, is, now you know why they ... Feeling, O monks, is not self. But I want to just, may my feeling be thus, may my feeling not be thus. And then he goes on to perception. May my perception, he says this doesn't obtain. It's like, we can't just go, I'm just going to change my feeling. And he goes on to perception. Perception, O monks, is not self. If perception were self, then perception would not lead to affliction, and it should obtain regarding perception. May my perception be thus, may my perception not be thus. But this doesn't obtain. It's the same thing with mental formations. And the reason I kind of want to go through all of it is because it starts to get a little bit janky. So we all can kind of say like, yeah, I can move my finger, but it's a little weird because I don't have any real control over the nerves, the transmitters, the muscles. Like, I'm not actually I'm sort of at the mercy of it. I'm at the mercy of all these things working just to say, I'm going to move my finger. So the control there is a little odd. And then you kind of get the problem is like, well, why did I move this finger and not this finger? Like, where did that even come from that I thought, oh, I should move my finger, and I didn't say, oh, let me wave my hand, even as a demonstration. So as you move into things like mental formations, thoughts, consciousness, it gets a little more abstract and a little more tenuous. And remember where I started out there by saying the Buddha said, this is not easy. Like they say, if it was easy, everybody would do it. Let's go on. Consciousness is not self. If consciousness were self, then consciousness would not lead to affliction, and it should obtain regarding consciousness. May my consciousness be thus, may my consciousness not be thus. And indeed, O monk, since consciousness is not self, therefore consciousness leads to affliction, and it does not obtain regarding consciousness. May my consciousness be thus, may my consciousness not be thus. So again, we're back to there's no little person in the command booth. We can't boss form around. We can't boss our feelings around. We can't boss perception around. We can't boss mental formations. We can't boss our consciousness around. So if we can't, where is the we that's trying to? So there's always this weird thing. It's like, but where did the thought come from? That would be the thought, may my perception be thus. Like you get this recursion. And if there's no self, it has to bottom out. That it's just, it's causes and conditions. And this does really kind of run counter to experience. And also it runs counter to desire, because I really do want to be in control. A few talks ago, I talked about the Stoics, and the Stoics, like Buddhists and especially the Zen masters, they recognize that we are not in control, that we can't control the world. I think where the Stoics might, I don't know if they go wrong, but they might overemphasize that they did believe that we couldn't control the world, we could at least control ourselves. And that we could control ourselves through reason. And so that's why they were big, reason was their big thing. But it doesn't really seem to be the case. And to make this a little bit clearer, though, we have to distinguish control and lacking control, which the Buddha is talking about, from habitual versus deliberative. So it's not the same thing. And Sam Harris has a great exercise that demonstrates the difference. So I want you to think of a movie title, any title. Think of a movie title. Have you got a movie title? All right. Now, what movie title did you get? Just anyone. Unmute yourselves.
Casablanca.
Okay.
Casablanca. Yeah.
Tim?
Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
All right. That's a habitual tendency if ever I saw one. Again, what did you get?
I don't know where this came from, but Gone with the Wind.
So that's funny. So, but did anyone consider The Wizard of Oz? Does everybody remember that there's The Wizard of Oz?
Yeah.
How about Big Trouble in Little China with Kim Cattrall and Kurt Russell? Okay. So we know that all the movies that have been, there's ones we haven't seen, and there's ones we don't know the titles of, like all the foreign Academy Award winners, basically the rest of the world. There's the ones we know and that we've seen, but why we can't explain which ones occurred to us. If you go back and you do it again, out of all the movies you've seen, you couldn't control, you couldn't pre-think. There's no pre-thinking of anything. So, and there could have been nothing more deliberative than picking a movie. Just pick a movie title. But we didn't go like through a Rolodex and go through every one. And we can't, if you just keep doing it, we'll see, you have no idea why certain movies occur to you. You can't even explain why you picked the one you picked a lot of the time. Or you pick, well, it's got that actor in it, it's got that actress in it, had a good script, or it was Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So unless you're habitually spouting the names of movies, which might be Tim, you can see that you were deliberative, you're not in control of the process. So this is kind of a good illustration of the Buddhist talking about being not in control of thoughts. Like and they talk about this weird sometimes on Pali Canon, which I really like. Remember, we were just talking about the Ayachana Sutta that says, it didn't say the Buddha thought, I can't teach this. It says, this line of thinking arose in his awareness. So let's go back to the middle sentence. They're always in the process of change, constantly born, constantly dying. My husband thinks we talk about death too much, so I'm going to rephrase it. They're always in the process of change, constantly beginning, constantly ending. And so this is a shorthand for dependent origination or dependent arising, co-arising. In the Asuttava Sutra, the Buddha describes some general, I like that, but he has a general principle here. When this is, that is. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. When this isn't, that isn't. From the cessation of this comes the cessation of that. So nothing could be simpler. Except that when he gets into the specifics, he's clearly talking about experience. He's talking about first-person experience, how ignorance comes to condition fabrications. I always get this sort of mixed up. Let's see, maybe he's going, let's see, yeah. In other words, I always get the causality. From ignorance as a requisite condition come fabrications. It's a very odd way of putting it. Okay, so yes, ignorance leads to fabrications. Fabrications come to consciousness. Consciousness becomes name and form, sixth sense media. That leads to contact, to feeling, to craving. And craving leads to clinging and sustenance, which leads to becoming and birth, aging and death. And we can take that to be kind of small. Sometimes, I'm not completely hip. I'm not hip with the whole reincarnation thing. But from Shakespeare, we know, Shakespeare, the sleep is the death of each day's life. And so I often think of, each day as being a life. You wake up in the morning, you're a little disoriented. You go, why am I awake? Why do I want to get up? It's kind of like being born. And then you go off about the day, and then you go to bed at night and you lose consciousness, hopefully, unless you suffer from insomnia. And it starts over and over again. I also think sometimes you have periods of your life that are the different realms. I always try to guess what they are. Like, I think teenagers are the Titans, the Asuras. And maybe in your 20s, you think you're a long-lived God. So yeah, you might be able to work with that a little bit to find out which one. I think maybe when you get old, you turn into a pet or an animal. I've never said animal, right? Maybe it's a baby or an animal. I don't, we have to work with that a little. It's not an exact match, but we can work with it. So again, this dependent co-arising, this process of change, there's a reference also to the ghost in first-person experience. We're not making grand ecological claims about rainforests and sea turtles and recycling, and those are important, but they're not, I don't think they're the point. When this is, that is. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. When this isn't, that isn't. From the cessation of this comes the cessation of that. And again, this was an agricultural culture. They probably were just crossing over into, they had a large enough surplus that they could have the sramanas and a standing army. And they had, metallurgy and all kind, crafts and merchants. So they understood cause and effect, I think. Where it seems not to apply, especially if you look at this in the context of Brahmanism, it doesn't seem to apply to me. It doesn't seem to apply to us, that we are not in control. And this first in talking about this first person experience, the Buddha is trying to get us to clear up our delusions about control that lead to suffering because we imagine ourselves to be in control, when in fact we're not. And I think in the Mahayana, I used to think this a lot. I used to think, because you have the formulation, it's the two wings of the Garuda, of wisdom and compassion. And I used to always think it's like, well, wisdom, that's kind of hard, but I'll just be compassionate. I'll just be compassionate. The compassion is something we do until we figure out wisdom. And I'm coming to think that it's actually the opposite, that true compassion arises from wisdom. It arises when we realize that it's the same for everyone. This is a great compassion, and it's not the Tibetans are always fond of calling sort of the knee-jerk compassion, they call it granny compassion. So in the Tibetan tradition, at least, there's a recognition of tough love. This is a recognition that everybody is the product of their causes and conditions. And Kuan Yin hears the cries of the world, but not all cries for help are the same, and not all cries have tears. And as Buddhists, we vowed to do the same. And this can cause us to be out of step with many of our peers. But as Uncle Ben said, with great power comes great responsibility. But we have to realize it, I think, for ourselves to recognize it in others. And so if there's no ghost, if there's nobody in control, how did we come to be here this morning? And I think that's perhaps the Zen great mystery. So now we can move into Zen. And that went 5 minutes longer than I thought it would, but hey. So thank you very much for joining me. And I open it up. There's a word I'm not using. Well, it's two words. I'm not using it on purpose because sometimes it freaks people out. And I am surprised a lot of the time how many people I talk to will believe in no self, but still believe in those words, which I'm not using. Somebody else can use them. I'm not going to use those words. Any questions? Jan, you're going to talk. I know you're talking next week. I know the title of your talk.
Yeah, it's very similar. So I'm going to end up giving the key point of my talk. So when you look at healing, like your hand, right? How much control do you have over that healing? I had cataract surgery on the 15th of February. Most people, the blurriness clears up in 2 to 3 days. It's been almost 3 weeks now, and my blurriness has not cleared up. I've learned a lot about what's going on, but I have no control over this. It may take a month, it may take 2 months, it may take 3 months. I'm an outlier in the, in the statistical bell curve of how this goes, but it has a lot to do with a specialized layer of cells on your cornea. And there's corneal swelling. So I have no control over that. And my eye doctor has given me drops, which occasionally work, but occasionally don't work. So this is all, I was scheduled to have the second cataract surgery the week after, right? So it's kind of like, I really felt very disappointed and very kind of depressed about the whole thing because I felt like a failure, right? But I'm not in control. I'm not in control at all. But still, it was like really down about it. So I have this very good friend in California that we are honest enough with each other that we will admit when we're really down. So I wrote her and said, this is really getting to me. And she wrote back and said, after 40 some years of therapy and after my time sitting meditation, that we have learned we're not very good at dealing with difficult conditions. And I said, what? Wait. No, we're supposed to be getting good. We're supposed to be getting better at this. We're supposed to have improved our ability to deal with difficult conditions. But no, she was honest. And she wrote, no, what we learn is that we're not very good at dealing with difficult conditions. We learn the nature of suffering. That's what we learn. We don't learn to deal with it. We do have tools. We learn to deal with it in different ways, but what we're learning is we're not very good at this. We're really not very good at this.
I did mean to ask you how you were doing, but I couldn't figure out a way to do it. I was like, because I was, but it's only blurry in one eye. Is that what that means?
Yeah. So I have. So
you're pulling a Dokai
lens
on us.
Here. There's a lens here. There's no way to correct this with the lens.
Oh.
So I have actually degraded my vision, and I kind of feel vulnerable going out in the world. So I really shouldn't be driving. I haven't taken up, the volunteer work that I was doing before, because I don't think it's exactly safe to be doing. So it's completely, my life has been completely disrupted. And the scary part for me is talking to the doctor. There's no way to predict if the other eye is going to react the same way or react more in the way with the center of the bell curve. So this is fun.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of Ushiama Roshi. When he talks about Zazen, he talks about, in Opening the Hand of Thought, that Zazen is not successful. Zazen, which we're not supposed to talk about, is not, he draws a line, puts little Z's at the ends of it. It's not staying on the line, it's recognizing every time you leave the line. Like that's every time you do that, that's waking up. And so, yeah, maybe it is the case that we just have to keep waking up. And maybe that's what we get better at.
Yeah, so that's kind of what the talk next week is about.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I won't say anymore. Does anyone else have any questions? Comments? Kat?
I don't know if it's a question or more of an observation and awareness that your talk may have brought about. I tend to be, I don't know what I am. I don't think I'm rebellious as much as stubborn,
Mm-hmm.
But I when you started talking about I'm completely at the mercy of my nervous system working correctly, et cetera, to move my finger, and that I have no impact on that, et cetera. I start thinking, now is that true?
That's a good thing. Yeah.
And so I thought, but wait a minute, we have creative thought. There is something that happens in the ghost. But I started thinking a little more about that as I'm listening to you, and I realized that actually we don't, because we're a machine that's so dependent on input. And so there's causes and conditions that present us with certain input. And then we have something that we call creative thinking, or maybe it's just wisdom arising, which again is, did I create that wisdom? Well, no, not really. Wisdom came because I in my experience, a certain cause and condition arose that I had a moment of awareness, and so I hate to admit it, but I think you're right.
but to me, it's actually sort of liberating because conditions can become the causes later. Like, so you can affect the chain. Like you can't, you can influence the chain within, the chain of causality within, certain bounds, becoming aware of it. But But yeah, it is sort of. Heartman?
Well, yeah, a few things. It always irritates me when I hear people talk about no self, because that's a mistranslation of the word anatta,
Nonsense.
which technically is not self. It's not no self. The
Right.
term translates as not self. And the Buddha never said that you don't have a self. He said that you can't find it anywhere you look,
Mhm.
you know, but that doesn't negate our sense of self, which Evan Thompson talks about as being a construction. We construct a sense of self, and just because it's a construction doesn't make it unreal. I love that distinction that he has there. Just because it's a construction doesn't make it unreal. Anyway,
Right.
So,
I think that's in the Nun Sutra. Really, that's in the Nun Sutra, Vajra Sutra.
I
It says,
don't know, possibly, but it came out of his Waking Dreaming Being book, which I highly recommend to people. But,
this is a heap of sheer constructions. Now,
Yeah.
she does say here no being is found. It certainly is a little, but
well, it's
yeah.
true that you're not going to find yourself in your brain. You're not going to find yourself in your body. You're not going to find it in your feelings. And that's what they say. You can look at all those places that make up yourself, and it's not there because it's constructed out of innumerable parts. But that construction functions.
Yes.
It does function. It's,
And that's the Madhyamaka, right? The Madhyamaka view is that things don't exist, but they function. There's not a pen, but I can write with it.
Well, they don't say things don't exist. Not in Madhyamaka that I.
Well, they don't exist from their own side.
Right. They don't have an independent existence.
Yeah, independent existence.
Right.
But they do function. Yeah. But things do function.
Yeah.
What was? Well, I'm sorry, I cut you off though. What was? You said you had a few things.
I wanted to tell Jan to hang in there. I had my first eye surgery last week, and I'm looking to get my second one. But so far, it's okay. So I just, in fact, I wound up with 20/20 vision in my operated on eye. So I'm fortunate. But thanks. Well, good luck with your vision there, Jan. So, thank you.
Anyone else? Does anyone know the words I wasn't using? Hartman knows the words I wasn't using.
But tell them to me anyway.
Free will.
And we have the freedom to create the conditions for change.
But based on the previous conditions, which is why there are no uncaused causes. So
I'll agree to that.
No Archimedes point we can stand on and say, oh, I'll be a doctor. Tim?
Yes, Jushin. So what's your reaction to the commonly repeated expression, whatever, that we don't choose the cards that are in our hand that are dealt to us, but then we choose how we get to play them?
Yeah, so no. Yeah, I mean, but because you can even imagine doing it, right? The card, because we did this game, right? That was the movie game. You got the cards are basically cards or the movies that occurred to you. But even in deciding how to take however many cards you got and turn it, into a hand, I don't know, I'm thinking maybe rummy here. Even then is just going to depend on the causes and conditions of, well, maybe bridge is, like, are going to follow suit. Have other people done what? And it still depends on the causes and conditions. It depends on the other players. Yeah. I mean, it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, but it's probably not quite as clean as all of that. But feel free if there is a dissenting opinion.
Well, I'll have one more comment. I don't know how
Aaron
it
does.
is to Tim's point, but I was reading a book, and he went through a list of different cognitive biases.
Yeah.
And
I teach these.
It was a very long list.
Long list.
Of all the different biases that we are susceptible to that affect our thinking and our attitude towards things. I mean, somewhere I'm gonna find that and print that out, because the
confirmation bias, availability heuristic, cherry picking,
it's a long
gambler's
list.
Fallacy. It's a long list. It's horrible.
Anyway,
it's surprising it all works at all.
Yes, that's what I would say.
Aaron?
Yeah, this is really interesting, Jushin. Thank you for all this. I guess it's we spend the teachings over the centuries spend so much time looking at this idea of no abiding self, and we all sort of try to have a little glimpse of, because we want the out of the box. It's so hard to get an idea of that, and so all this energy, and I guess it just I kind of notice in myself it becomes quickly very academic, and you construct all these arguments, and it just sort of I guess it probably, if I asked every person here, they would have a response. I'm just kind of curious what yours or anybody's. So what? I mean, like, why? What is it ultimately that we're trying to achieve by really getting the fact that there's no abiding? Like, why is that such a central thing in Buddhism? Is my question making sense?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I'll open it up to the assembled. And there's not a real big rush.
I broke it.
You broke it. You broke it. Jan will do it. He'll leap in where angels fear to tread.
You just don't take things as seriously. I mean, that's the liberation. It's just like, yeah, I had that thought. Well, yeah, so what? It's just another crazy thing that's come up. And so you just don't take things as personally if there's no person.
Yeah, that's a hard one, and that comes up, and when things happen, you take it personally. It's hard. My big one with chronic pain is like, I still do it because I was Catholic, and Kenya knows about this. What did I do to deserve this? It's like every so often, not very often, but there are bad days where it's enough where I go. And it's like, no, it's not personal. It's just is. And I think in that great compassion there is, and I think that you see this really flower. I think there's something about Buddhism when it hit China, it just really, something great happened when it hit China and in Japan, and you have I just like the, the wabi-sabi, the sort of poignance that comes from not taking it personally, just like, this just is the way it is. And there's a sort of equanimity and that arises. Kat?
I have to think. I got so into listening. I almost forgot what I was going to say. Okay. To Aaron's question, I think one of the reasons why I think the fact that we are Westerners and we were really raised in a very, if at all, faint notion of what collectivism is, we struggle to maintain this sense of independence, sense of control, sense of living out your destiny. All of this we think we can do. And not only do we think we can do it, we're told that we can from the time we're little kids. You can be anything you want to be, And this is this idea that, well, no, the sense of self is all a delusion. I think it's just, we're so culturally bound, it's really, really hard for us. I mean, I don't know. That's what occurs to me, though. I think that this would be a little easier to swallow, we wouldn't struggle so much, we wouldn't suffer quite so much if we were, if the causes and conditions, concerning our birth, I guess, and our upbringing were a little different. That's all I got.
We got Tim, and then we got Hartman.
Yes, so I like both what Jan and Kat had to say a lot. And I'll just add that the more we understand our lack of self, the easier it is to practice the precepts and be successful at them. Or conversely, the more we feel separated and concrete and solid, the more we violate the precepts, the more we may lie in order to get what we want. And also the opposite of understanding no self is being oblivious. Something to tell people, even if, you're making all these mistakes and, whatever in your practice, whatever, as long as you realize what's going on, that's huge compared to the people that when they're angry at someone else, it really is all 100% the other person. I mean, that, and they're doing this and they're doing that in this world they live in that has no wisdom. And so there's no way out either. There's no chance to try and address one's own role and responsibility because it's all the other person. So it seems like even if we don't have, which we don't, 100% understanding of no self, just being aware of this is one of our mistakes we make, thinking we're separate, helps us deal with conflict, deal with resolution of that conflict, deal with our own, emotions, whatever, that it can be lighter. That's all I had to say.
I like that, lighter. It can be lighter. Hartman?
Got unmuted. In response to Aaron's question about the centrality of this no self thing, you go back to when Buddha started teaching, and one of the prevailing ideas at the time was the sense of Atman, and it was the Brahmins were doing that, and the Atman was yourself. It was a pure, everlasting thing, and if you did all of the ceremonies correct and all of the chants correct and everything, that you would eventually become one with the Godhead, or and you would be free from the cycle of birth and death. And the Buddha's going, oh no, that's not the way it is. And I think that's why those teachings were in the early in the very early sutras there on not self, but the sense of self as a predicament or as a problematic idea has lasted down through the centuries, and here we are with 120 years of psychological language that didn't exist at the time of the Buddha, and we take that, we think in psychological language, but that didn't come into being until like the turn of the century, 1800s to the 1900s. But anyway, so I think that he was specifically teaching against the idea of Atman and and that pure sense of self. And then that teaching has just kind of blossomed because modern day sense of self is quite complicated. So anyway, I don't know if that makes any sense to you, Aaron, but that's my thoughts. So thank you.
I think we're out of time. So Carl, Hartman, if you want to finish this up.
Yes, I want to thank everybody. As usual, over in the chat, there's a link to a donation page there, because we're supported by your generosity. Where am I? Yeah, well, we already heard that Ryushin is giving the talk next week, and I'll probably be here again. And the name of his talk, I don't know if we mentioned it before, Joan Didion on Self. So
we get more not self.
It's a rich vein to mine.
Yeah.
Yes. Let me see. Hokyoji is pretty quiet. We're going to be closed down until April. And we'll have some things coming up in April. Work weekend and caring for the land weekend. People can think about those. And then I think at the end of April, we've got retreats coming up. We've got a women's retreat coming up. There's also
May, right? Middle May.
Yeah, that's in May. At the end of April, we have a Qigong retreat that's coming. One of our people, Alan Williams, is bringing his Qigong group down, and we're supposed to have 15 people, which would be really nice. Anyway, yeah, May and early June look busy. Dokai is basking in the sun in Cali, Colombia. He got down there this week, and so we're hoping he has a really good time. So I think we can go ahead and close with the 4 vows. Beings are numberless, vowing to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, vowing to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it.
Thank you, everyone, for a great conversation.
Thanks, everyone, for coming. Thanks, Jushin. I enjoyed your talk.
Yeah, thank you. Had fun.
All righty. Adios. See you next week.